Hello, everyone, and welcome to TEDxKTH Salon. I'm Avid Fayaz, and I will be moderating this event today. I'm the head of education at KTH AI Society, and I'm also a student in computer science at KTH. We are very happy to have you here today, and today's event was made possible through our collaboration with KTH Library, which is the organizer of this event, with KTH AI Society. And to describe a bit more about what we do at the AI Society, I would like to welcome our chairman, Filip Dimitrovic, to talk about what we do.
Hi, everyone. I would just like to welcome you on the behalf of KTH AI Society. We at KTH AI Society are a student organization, and we have two main approaches. We want to give students here at KTH some opportunities within the AI field. We do so but by having collaboration with companies, such as we're having workshops, hackathons, and so forth. But we also do collaborations with academia. We do projects here at KTH, also collaborate with other organizations within KTH, and also other universities. So on behalf of KTH AI Society, welcome again.
So, without further ado, this is TEDxKTH.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
So, our first speaker today is Haluk Akay. He is a postdoc currently researching at KTH on how AI and design principles can be applied to utilize engineering knowledge for decision-making in sustainable manufacturing. Here to speak about what might we lose when we begin to rely on generative AI, please welcome Haluk Akay.
Good afternoon. So when we generally talk about AI, the conversation tends to talk about novelty. So new possibilities, new abilities, new threats. And today I want to talk a bit about existing abilities that we have and what we may lose, actually, if we come to rely on generative AI. So it's very natural that when we have a new technology that becomes integral to a part of our life, that we begin to trust it to perform certain functions or certain tasks. And as we trust it more, then we allow it to essentially automate certain parts of our life. And as we allow this to happen, we ourselves begin to lose some competency, naturally. So if you've had the chance to interact with some of the latest conversational AI models, you may have noticed what is being automated here. So historically, automation has involved manual types of tasks. Those automation have greatly improved our life, generally for the better. If you've had that chance, though, to interact with the conversational AI model, you may have noticed that the automation is moving from your hands maybe to your head. So from the physical to the cerebral. So I personally find this topic very fascinating because I did my PhD examining how language models can be used to automate how we extract useful knowledge from very long forms of documentation, specifically for engineering design. And I want to share some observations that I've come across, and really 3 abilities that I think we stand to lose if we become reliant on generative AI. And the first ability is that of how we communicate scientific discovery. So right now, we have kind of superficial metrics for how we reward success in science. And one of these is basically the number of publications that a scientist can produce each year. And as a result, in some fields, you have more than 1 million publications every year in this field. And the peer review process, which is for academia, this is the bedrock upon which we validate new information. It cannot keep up with this. It's impossible. And so as a result, when we allow generative AI to essentially bury human-written forms of documentation that describe problem solving, and then flood this with machine-generated forms of text, we are essentially making it very difficult and losing the ability to validate truth in terms of new information in science. It's possible that the peer review process itself may become automated too, and then you will have the machine both writing and evaluating the new types of information. So the second ability that I want to address, and this is not something I think that AI has started, but that AI could finish. And this is our ability to connect socially in a community. In these cases, we also are having some superficial types of metrics when it comes to what means to be successful socially. So it could be the number of friends that you have, popularity. Over the past maybe decade or so, we've seen the social communities shift from sort of a physical world to a virtual space. And as we shift in this way, we notice that we can have many more friends. We can have thousands of friends. We can have millions of people that are following essentially everything that we do. And that is great, but it comes with some drawbacks. We're kind of constrained in a social type of box virtually, in this kind of a sense. You can still make human connections, but in order to reach, you're very limited. You can go through text or images, you can share photographs, you can send messages. Already, images are becoming digitally enhanced. There's images that are completely computationally generated. When a friend shares a message to you, the machine can sometimes give you a suggestion of how to respond, how to finish your response, even whole phrases of how to reply to them. What we risk losing then is if we automate this final type of connection, that we could completely put a lid on this box and become completely isolated in this way. So we risk losing the ability to communicate socially, and we risk the ability to communicate scientifically. And we are risking this for some reward that is a thing of scale. So to maximize our social networks, or to maximize the number of publications that we can put out, from certain perspectives. And what we're exchanging when we make this kind of a deal is we are exchanging our individual perspectives, essentially, for basically some interpolations from a handful of data sets that are being used to train essentially one type of learning architecture upon which most language models are built. So this is a big trade and a big exchange, and what we stand to lose then is this ability to construct arguments and to intellectually disagree with one another, to contradict each other, and to take an idea and then put it into words and construct some way of communication. So I was saying at the beginning, if we consider automation right now, going from the hands to the head, I feel like we may stand to lose the ability to think. But I consider myself to be an optimist. I think that humans will not be content with being in a virtual social box. I think that the peer review process will evolve, and the scientific manner of communicating discovery will evolve as well. I do worry about our ability to think and losing that, coming up with ways to be genuine and think for ourselves. So really, what can we do in this case? If you are using language models, I suggest continue using them for some things. But if there's something very important that you need to communicate, I suggest doing it in person, to someone face to face. And if you can't do that, pick up the phone and talk to them. If not in person, then in real time. And then if you really can't do that, then write to the person yourself, like on a piece of paper with your hands. Try to reclaim a bit of the automation. Thank you very much.
Do the questions? Yeah. Just to have a short question from you.
Yes.
What do you think, which points scientific, social, or our just ability to think will be most at risk because of the automation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends on sort of the incentives behind what's driving these automations, like where the money is, you can always follow. But I think the ability to think, the last one, is one of the most riskiest to lose.
That we will not be socially interacting with each other on the same level. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Francesca La Rosa is a postdoc researcher working on using AI for climate action and sustainable development goals. She is the recipient of the Marie Curie Postdoc Individual Fellowship with a project focused on sustainability, benefits, and environmental costs of AI investments. Here to speak about sustainable AI for sustainable societies, please welcome Francesca La Rosa. The controllers on the...
Thank you. So Titan is the first word that Lord Byron in 1816 uses to open his famous Prometheus, a poem about a Titan who gifted humanity with the supreme element, fire. With fire, it came cooking and processed food. It came sanitizing and swiping out bacteria. It came combustion and our fossil fuel-based economy. Our society depends on natural elements, but fire changed it all. We started in our world to think that actually we could use every natural element precisely because of fire. So Titan, so Prometheus, gives humanity this gift in order to free from slavery and ignorance. It gives humankind this empowerment tool from the oppressive conditions imposed by the gods. But he pays a very high price, because every night a vulture visits him, devours his liver. Every day his liver grows again, and so it goes in excruciating pains until the end of time. The Prometheus, which is a myth by the Greek mythology, actually teaches us a very important lesson. Economists know it and often say that there is no free lunch, no big discovery, no significant invention comes at no price. It is the case also for our world. We know now how to use natural elements not only for self-sustaining reason, but also how to transform them in order to fuel scientific discovery and technological advancements. That's why materials and minerals in our earth crust are becoming our electric vehicles, and our graphical processing units, infrastructures, and cables that fuel AI. That's why the water filling up our lakes and running in our rivers is transformed into energy thanks to hydropower dams. And is also cooling down the data centers whenever computation is happening. That's why our renewable energy resources, for example, the power of the sun or the strength of our winds, is used to change our energy systems, so altering the geopolitical landscape as energy becomes more distributed. All this was possible because of the sparkle of curiosity, our needs, and an era of relative abundance. But now we're living in a world where biodiversity collapse and climate change is actually asking us to confront ourselves with the same lesson the Byron Prometheus is teaching us. There's no free lunch. As I said, biodiversity collapse and climate change are very difficult challenges if you think about that. And there is a new wave of hope thanks to AI. AI, artificial intelligence, very cool name. Created in the late 50s because of a very famous summer workshop. It was meant to mirror first and then to substitute human intelligence, thinking about three things: memory organization, perpetual learning, and critical thinking, critical reasoning. Is it though artificial and intelligent? In her very famous book, Atlas of AI, Kate Crawford says that actually AI is neither artificial nor intelligent, because it's very much dependent on the resources and on human knowledge. So it's just an extractive process. If we allow ourselves to consider AI as an extractive process, then it is mandatory that we direct every AI application towards societal good, towards improving our social well-being for current and future generations, which, in other words, means with sustainability principles in mind. But this is not really the case, because AI has both direct and indirect impact on our worlds. So if we focus on direct impacts, for example, it is very much dependent, as I said, on the materials used to build the graphical processing units. But it's also very much dependent on the electricity supply and efficient value chains that move people and goods from one place to the other of the planet. So as large language model becomes larger and larger and larger, so the emissions they produce are ballooning. Now, there are several estimates of the emissions produced for inference and training. It's very difficult to compute emissions of inference, and so the majority of researchers are focused on training, because they know where the training is happening, so they can track down how the situation is moving. And the recent experiment of 11 AI different models showed that the biggest of them, 6 billion parameter large language model training, so medium-size large language model, is producing the equivalent of the emission of an average US home in a year. And interesting, this experiment was actually running the training up to 13%. So a full training run would produce at least an order of magnitude more emissions than the one showed by them. There are solutions, though, which we should definitely consider. First of all, locations of training matter. Again, researchers proved that if the training is happening in very highly efficient location, the emissions produced are 1/3 of the emission produced in least efficient location energy-wise. And also, it is important that we direct our research efforts toward developing accurate, efficient, smaller model. So rather than having monstrosities, which are large language model, up to trillions and trillions of parameters, we can actually focus mathematicians and computer science in developing smaller but accurate model. And this is already happening because some of these models are running on your phone right now. There are also indirect impact, and this is where the interest part comes. Because it's basically impossible to estimate what is the AI penetration doing to other sectors. So let's take, for example, the mining industry. The mining industry uses AI applications for basically two things: prospecting and precision drilling, so exploration. AI models are used to understand where the high-quality ores are located. It means that once you know they're underneath your feet, there is an economically important, valuable deposit, you will dig. But it is not for granted that drilling and extracting the material is actually a benefit, sustainability-wise, of course. We also don't know what is the impact of pushing consumers, targeting them, asking them to buy more products. So we have a problem of materials, but we also have a problem of consumer-based emission, of course. Now, what do we do then? Well, the Prometheus, at the very end, suggests what Prometheus means to us. It's a signal, it's a symbol. It's the symbol of a destiny we create, but it's also a symbol of a destiny we help changing. Humans have this great ability of building the futures they want, and whenever the trajectory is not correct, they halt, reverse, repair, if there is the will. Nobody says to halt AI. Actually, AI is very successful in delivering us great benefits. But it's very important that now we focus on one collective and burning question: what for? What do we want AI to support us with? And there has never been a more perfect time than now to focus on the environmental impact of AI and to focus on this question. Because in fact, it's better to prevent a crisis from happening rather than curing it. It's better to prevent emission from being released rather than then abating them in 5 or 10 years' time. So this is the only burning question we should ask ourselves today. Respond collectively as soon as possible. Thank you. I'm going to go. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. You mentioned Prometheus, so now I would want, would you think that do we have a Hercules? Will something be our savior in this question?
Us, the academic community. Nobody else can, because the academic community is the best equipped to actually interact and exchange and have this conversation in and out the rooms where we're actually meeting. We are kind of way freer from economic interest, and we have this opportunity to really talk and develop things which monitor and help reversing this trend, if this trend is not what we want, of course.
Well, we trust the academic community to hopefully
yes.
be our savior then.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, Olof Mogren, is a senior researcher and scientist at RISE Research Institute of Sweden, heading the deep learning research group working on foundational and applied machine learning for the Earth. Here to talk about tackling climate change using AI, please welcome Olof Mogren.
Thank you. Right. Humanity is facing the grand challenge of saving the planet. Our actions have caused severe climate change, leading to extreme weather events, droughts, floods, rising sea levels, and an acute biodiversity crisis. In fact, we're currently in the middle of the 6th mass extinction event in the history of the Earth. We are at an extinction rate 1,000 times the baseline at the moment. And for perspective, the 5th mass extinction event was 65 million years ago, when the dinosaurs were wiped out from the Earth. Coral reefs are an example ecosystem in a desperate situation. These are important. 25% of the fish in the ocean depend on these for food, for shelter, for a place to rear their young. The reefs also protect coastlines from storms and erosion and provide jobs for local communities and is a source for food and medicines. The UN IPCC states that 70 to 90% of the coral reefs will die by the time we reach 1.5 degrees global warming. By 2 degrees, 99% of the reefs will die. Not only marine life will be affected, also terrestrial animals will face extreme challenges. 4% of mammals will lose half of their habitat by 1.5 degrees global warming. 8% will lose it by 2 degrees. And by 3 degrees, 41% of mammals will lose half of their habitat. These are dire facts. I'm a researcher in computer science. I solve problems using computer programs for a living. My team and I develop AI-based tools to help fight these problems, help fight climate change, both with mitigation and adapting to the changes. AI are typically advanced statistical modeling that help us work with large data sets, often incorporating machine learning. The techniques take inspiration from human brains, but the goal is not to simulate it, it's just to benefit from some of its strengths. AI has shown tremendous advancements the last few years, as demonstrated by image generators and chatbots. But we can do so much more important things. AI is a powerful tool when it comes to perception tasks and managing large, noisy data sets, often able to wade through tons of data to produce important insights buried deep within. I just mentioned that biodiversity crisis is a symptom of climate change. It can also be part of the solution. By quantifying biodiversity, we can help track the climate change and see the effects that it has. And by improving conditions for biodiversity, for example, by investing in green infrastructure, we can actually take steps to mitigate climate change as well. One way that we leverage AI for this goal is collaborating with ecologists and naturalists who put up these small sound recording devices in the wild. Sound can travel up to tens of kilometers, and with this technology, vocalizing animals can be tracked as they move through the wilderness. This helps ecologists work with the data and to quantify the biodiversity. But it's also a lot of work to go through the recordings. These devices can easily record months of sound, and someone needs to go through it manually or with some help from technology. And that's where we come in. We have developed few-shot learning AI-based tools to analyze these data. It only requires 5 annotated samples from a certain specific species, and then it can wade through months and years of recordings and log every occurrence of that particular species. So this is data efficiency. We always consider also compute efficiency and annotation efficiency in our work. We've further developed this system using active learning to provide intelligent suggestions of onsets and offsets for sound events for the expert annotators, so they can work more efficiently and create the data needed to feed back into the algorithms that we can train and make them more accurate. Wetlands cover 6% of the Earth. Yet they are home to 40% of all animal species. This includes insects, amphibians, reptiles, birds, fish, and mammals. Furthermore, they store twice as much carbon as all the forests on the whole planet. And the forest covers about 30% of our planet. They're also important accumulators of water and provide flood protection, erosion control, natural water quality improvement, and opportunities for recreation. Protecting and restoring wetlands is a way to improve our resistance to flooding and droughts. But it will also mitigate climate change because it's a strong carbon sink. Using remote sensing with satellite imagery in combination with modern machine learning, we have created a wetland map of Sweden. This is in collaboration with a Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, whose fieldwork collects information about wetlands in the protected areas. Then we can train our fully convolutional models on that data and generalize to other areas. And we can compute this whole map of Sweden. This shows how we can produce information that can act as important decision support, and how we can help ecologists work more efficiently. The resulting maps can also change dynamically as new data comes in from satellites. We can do more general things with remote sensing. We can track other aspects of affecting both animal and human life, such as human development, changes in habitats, and deforestation. Furthermore, it can be used for wildfire detection, mapping of oceans, and estimations of clouds and their thicknesses. In fact, as we speak, one of our remote sensing models is actually on its way up to Earth orbit to be employed on the European Space Agency's satellite, where it will detect clouds and their thickness, which will in turn be useful for downstream analysis systems. I mentioned that wetlands are important as an accumulator of water. This will help when in future and with progressed climate change, we will have more of flooding events and more of droughts. This image shows Brazil just 1 week ago with heavy rainfalls, which have led to severe flooding. AI can help us understand the function of soil and terrain and model the dynamics of water. We have demonstrated a model that takes satellite imagery together with some extra information, such as soil moisture, elevation map, soil type, and terrain slope, and predicts a dense map of water flow. This has been trained on measurement sites that's been spread out over Sweden, and traditional work has only been able to predict the flow in those particular sites. But this work actually makes a prediction over the whole map, and this makes it a more useful decision support system. We're currently working together with researchers in Sao Paulo to try this out on streams in Brazil. Water flow can, of course, be simulated in even more detail, something that's traditionally been done using physics-based models. Graph neural networks have provided an alternative to this, which is computationally less heavy, but it has been less accurate. We just have created some results that make them more accurate and more efficient. And what you see here is a simulation using this system. Graph neural networks can be scaled up, and this image is from GraphCast. This is a system created by Google DeepMind. And my team of researchers, we're only a small group, but we're part of a large community of AI experts. And our contributions can be incorporated into other people's solutions, such as this system, which could incorporate our solution, our contributions on graph neural networks. As climate change progresses, it will lead to more instability, more extreme events, more resulting health issues, more people displaced, and more conflicts. We need to work on climate mitigation, such as ending our dependency on fossil fuels and investing in green infrastructure, reforestation, and restoring wetlands. AI is not a silver bullet. Like electrifying our transportation system or decreasing the greenhouse gas emissions from any given industry, it cannot solve climate change on its own. But it can be one part of the puzzle by providing advanced tools to interpret and present data. It can then be used to make informed decisions about many other things that in turn can make a positive impact. While the outlook doesn't look very great at the moment, I believe that humanity can put in the effort and make this planet supporting a decent life also in the future. Everything I mentioned is a team effort, and this is my team. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now we have had two slightly varying discussions on the impacts of AI on climate change. How do you think can balance this discussion of the impacts of AI itself on accelerating climate change, but also the potentials of using it to try to mitigate it?
Absolutely. It's a very important question. And every time we develop something, we need to ask ourselves, is this worth it? What are the positive impacts? What are the negative impacts? Do they compare? Is this a net positive thing that we're doing?
So hopefully we will be able to find that perfect key between using AI to mitigate it and also the debate between accelerationists and hesitants. But with that, thank you very much for your talk. Please.
Thank you.
Arnold Pierce is a professor in learning and education in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. Arnold's research focuses on paths to connect more young people with technology and engineering and help them to find a path towards STEM, and how AI can be applied to assist with that. Here to talk about AI and research, tool, collaborator, or spy, please welcome Professor Arnold Pierce.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. So, a slightly different talk, this one. And we're not going to talk so much about climate change, but we're going to perhaps take a bit of a point of departure in what Haluk was talking about at the beginning of this evening's presentations. So, what's going on here? You can't read that, and it's not the intention of this slide that you should, but you should look at the curve. What does that curve tell us? That curve tells us that AI tools have become increasingly costly, as we've already heard, and increasingly powerful. Essentially, the greatest plagiarism mechanisms ever developed. They can cut and paste in very fine scale from anything. They can identify patterns in large sets of data. They can help us to make decisions about climate change. They can undermine our ability to think. What are we, as mankind, going to choose? What I want to talk to you about now is not just these AI things, but also what makes them possible. So what was not mentioned was that my background is also computer science. So in the late 1980s, I was working on highly parallel computing systems. Back in those days, you can see approximately how powerful those computers were. A computer much less powerful than your mobile phone took up an entire building and required air conditioning. Today, we have supercomputers in our pockets and we're using them to send pictures to each other. And we can all ask ourselves, really? Is that necessary? And in the same way, AI. What made that possible? The models are not new. We've already heard that. They come from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. What makes this possible is the previous graph, or rather this graph in relation to the previous graph. Computational power, what we are able to do in real time, is what powers these tools. So what happens to research? I'm a researcher. I do research on primarily people nowadays and learning, what goes on in a learning process. How do you develop yourself as an individual towards your profession? Do we want to develop ourselves, or are we just too lazy? If you look at higher education, in other talks I've given, the observation I've been making is that what we do in most educational systems is use products, artifacts, to judge process. What AI does is generate the artifact without us having to engage ourselves with the process at all. You can produce a brilliant essay. You can produce a fabulous picture. You can produce presumably 3D printed furniture, etc., etc., etc. All of this with AI. But who cares? Is the product really worth it? And in research, of course, we can automate all sorts of things. I don't need to read 20, 30, 50 research articles anymore. I can ask AI to find them for me and summarize them and get the executive summary of what those 20 articles say on a 1 A4 page piece of paper. Is that good? I don't know. It's efficient. It will help you to produce these millions of articles that were talked about earlier, but does it help you to grow intellectually as a person? I don't think so. We have chosen not to grow by using that type of tool, potentially. So every time you decide to use an AI tool to perform your literature survey for you, to analyse your data, to manage citations or find new sources to cite to support your arguments, you should think to yourself, did I learn anything here? Or did I just abdicate my opportunity to learn in favour of AI doing something for me? But it's not just a tool. It can be a collaborator as well. Many journals and other publishing companies now have policies around how you should declare AI involvement in your publications. Did you write it yourself? Maybe not. But where do you draw the line? You know, we've had grammatical support, we have spell checking, you know, this little bouncing paperclip we all hated so much in Microsoft Word, right? Coming with smart comments. Well, these are all good tools. I turned up in Sweden 25 years ago. I didn't know any Swedish. How did I learn to write decent Swedish and to speak Swedish? Partly through watching children's television, but also through all the constant feedback that I got from computing tools telling me that there was likely to be a problem with something that I had written, not so much something I'd said. Then I had to rely on the social interactions that Haluk was saying we could perhaps abdicate also in the future. So these types of connections, these types of collaborations, is it really true then that AI is our friend our collaborator, an active part in our thinking process, that I can exchange ideas and expect constructive input from AI? Do I want AI to speak for me, or do I want to speak for myself? Every time you write a text, write a poem, express yourself in any form, it is your voice as a human being that shines through. Do we want to take away our individual voice in the production of research? And at the same time as we do that, we'll lose the opportunity to reflect. Much of reflection comes through writing. The research process is not about the product. It's about the journey. And nearly all learning processes are about the journey, not the destination. And I hope that most of us will continue to learn our entire lives. So I'm not sure that AI really is my collaborator, but it can be very, very, very seductive. Gee, I really need that next research grant. And I know that everybody else in this room is using AI to write a really sophisticated application. Will I get left out? Will I be left behind? All of us are thinking these thoughts. Will I be the one who misses out because I didn't jump on the bandwagon quickly enough? On the other hand, we can think about whether some of these practices that I've listed on the slide are even ethical. Do we really want AI to supercharge our next research paper? You have better things to do with your time. Let AI write your grant application. Hey, why bother to do your own statistical calculations? You know, AI can probably manage SPSS better than you or me. That's probably true as well, actually. I'm pretty crap at SPSS. This is dangerous. Qualitative analysis tools with automated AI classification engines built into them that will classify, characterize, and produce your outcome space for your thematic analysis automatically. This is so dangerous you shouldn't even begin to consider it, because the inbuilt bias that these systems bring with them, you have no idea how this thing was trained. You have no idea at all what underlying patterns it's been trained to pull out and make visible to you. When you do that as a researcher, sure, you bring with you your own biases, but it's part of our obligation as researchers also to make those biases, those background pieces of information visible to you, the recipient, the audience of that research. My background, of course, shapes what I see in qualitative data. But that's nonetheless very valuable if I can explain to you how that adds value to what I can see in that data. When AI looks at the data, we know it's unexplainable. We don't know at all how to make that background bias, those values, those types of intrinsic things that change the structure of a piece of research visible. So I don't think AI is my collaborator. And AI is already doing things that are actually research. Designing new drugs based on probabilistic models, which are now in clinical trials, for instance. So there are many application areas where these types of combinatorial techniques can generate surprising insights. And maybe this is of enormous value, but we should, I think, be a little bit cautious. To finish off, I actually think AI is a spy. It's out there lurking. It already knows what you've written. It knows what everybody else has written. And not only that, it's generating more text than the human race has ever generated. Very soon, human-generated text will be the minority of text on the internet. And that text will be used to train new models for the future. Again, where is our voice? Where is our agency? AI is not explainable. You don't know really where it's housed. You don't know who has access to your intellectual property, how they're using it, how they're manipulating you. And in research, I think this is incredibly dangerous. I ask you all to reflect as you start to use AI and think, is this me? Is this AI? And do I really want to stop learning myself? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I wonder if you think that universities and research institutes could have a holistic approach towards this and have guidelines for the researchers and the professors on how to use AI, or we should allow, as we are in an experimental phase perhaps with so many rapid discoveries in the field, for it to just grow a bit naturally and we start curbing it as in the dangerous areas.
I think regulating AI is impossible. It's like trying to put the cat back into the box. The cat's already out there. We've opened the can of worms. We have the Pandora's box open. Now we have to learn to live with it. So for me, I think the discussion that we should be having at KTH and the discussion that we should be having internationally is not so much how do we use AI right now, but how do we expect AI will impact professions in the next 5 to 10 years, because it's our responsibility to educate engineers to work in those professions in the future. And they will need new skills. They will need to have been trained in the use of AI tools in their profession in a responsible manner. And harking back to the other speakers, sustainability and ethical compass is key. So we need to be giving those values and those skills to our students. But I don't think blanket regulation is going to solve that for us. I think we need to have a much longer discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mario Romero is an associate professor in visualization at the Department of Computational Science and Technology at KTH. He's also the National Technical Manager and Local Node Coordinator of the Swedish Research Council's National Research Infrastructure Visualization, Infravis. Today, he will be speaking about AI in the OR, advances of artificial intelligence in the operating room. Please welcome him.
All right, the value of face-to-face. Hi, everyone. Thank you, thank you. Please take a look at what you're seeing now. In a minute, I'm going to ask you to just close your eyes for a second. I'm going to be talking about towards AI in the OR. Now, imagine that we could only see edges. Close your eyes. You can only see edges. Remember the image you were looking at just a second ago. Open your eyes, please. What would the world look like? Perhaps something like this. Now, imagine that someone came along and said, wow, I've invented a great machine that allows us to see in black and white. And we've seen that. And a few years later, they come back and say, wow, we can now see color. And we see that. In fact, most of us take it for granted. But seeing color is not a trivial thing. We have neural receptors that perform extraordinary abilities, which we would consider them to be AI, that aggregate different wavelengths of light and give us color perception. We don't actively have to work hard at seeing color. Now imagine that the next person comes along and says, wow, we can go beyond the visible spectrum, ultraviolet, infrared. Oh, we can do X-ray and see through people and then do better medicine. We don't need to imagine that. That is the world. Would we be concerned that these technologies would take over our jobs, would change our minds about things, develop consciousness and take over the world? Is there a fundamental difference between these technologies and AI? Well, the current state of AI, and this is an AI-generated image, the current state of AI is a set of powerful tools that augment cognition. They allow us to see through space and time in ways that humans can't. Most importantly, they allow us to see through mountains of data. And don't underestimate the hype. Data is the fuel of science and AI. AI allows us to see through mountains of data and gather perception and understanding that would otherwise be impossible. It's debatable whether it will develop consciousness. It's not clear. We don't know. Now, let's focus on a specific topic. For the past 20 years or so, I've been working with AI, computational perception, data visualization, for a multiple of real-world applications, many of which have gravitated towards healthcare. So I want to take you on a journey. The first place I want to visit is the home, healthcare in the home. And what we did is we automated a doctor's visit for the elderly where we measure mobility. Mobility is important for all of us, particularly for the elderly. The test is called the Get Up and Go test, and it is very simple. From a sitting position, the patient stands up, takes 3 steps forward, 3 steps back, sits back down. The movement is timed, and the gestures are measured. Now, of course, when adults go to the doctor, they're going to perform the best they can. Furthermore, these are sporadic visits. So this was a great opportunity for AI to make a difference. If we place a simple camera system in the home, could we record with certain accuracy the gestures of, from a sitting position, stand up and take the first few steps, and measure it continuously, not just when you visit the doctor. More importantly, measure it in reality, as people actually moved when they're not being observed. From the home, the next step in the journey was a simulated clinic. With my colleagues at Georgia Tech, we developed a pediatrician's office, a simulated pediatrician's office, and we brought in a bunch of children under the age of 3. The goal was to, similar to a pediatrician's visit, where children go through different tests, for example, their height, their weight, reflexes. There is a test that measures social interactivity. So we wanted to simulate that. We wanted to model that in our lab. And we instrumented it with cameras, microphones, skin conductivity sensors, eye tracking equipment, all of it connected with machine learning, to not replace the therapist. We were working with real therapists and real children. Not to replace the therapist, but to augment them, to allow them to see details that they otherwise couldn't see, to allow them to record the history of the visit in ways that their minds cannot. Because we were focusing on social cues, an early feature that we need to focus on for detecting autism spectrum disorders. We focused on a skill that humans have, most humans have, called joint attention. Joint attention is the ability to know what we're talking about. If I say, this is a hand, because you know language, it's pretty clear. But if you don't know language, you don't know if the thumb is the hand, if the nail is the hand. There's ambiguity in language. Joint attention allows us to focus on the socially meaningful objects of reference. And the thing is, without joint attention, if by 36 months humans do not develop language, it's very difficult for them to develop it afterwards. So we used algorithms to track where the children are looking and where the adult, this is the view of the therapist, is looking and seeing if there are moments of contact and joint attention. So from simulated clinics, the natural next step was to go into real hospitals. Early observation determined that the brain of the hospital is the nurse's desk, perhaps not surprisingly. From there, operations are managed, day-to-day operations. So we instrumented the space with a number of cameras and computational perception algorithms working together with architects and hospital staff to understand the patterns of occupancy and flow in the hospital, to better program it. Again, we're not replacing anybody, we're just giving them the tools to augment their understanding of their everyday practices. And next step was, now this is a recent project that is happening currently in Sweden, and we instrumented the space with IoT sensors to measure indoor air climate. And also using outdoor climate, using deep neural networks, we predicted the next 24 hours of indoor climate. Obviously, all this information is useless without visualization. So we created wall-mounted visualizations that are interactive, simply with a tablet, allowing people to explore the recent past and the near future to determine if the environmental conditions are correct for example, operations. If those conditions go beyond the boundary, temperature and humidity, the instruments and the space is not optimal for operation. It increases the risk of hospital-acquired infections. Zooming into the operating room, here you see an image of a simulation of the air in the room. We're using a tool called computational fluid dynamics. Now, why does it matter? Well, humans, when we exhale, we produce millions of particles that carry bacteria. And we're shedding skin even with protective gear. We're still shedding particles. If these particles are transported by the air into the surgical site, it increases the risk of infection. So we want ventilation systems to transport those particles out of the room as quickly and efficiently as possible. But physical obstacles and heat-generated entities will perturb the air, creating turbulence and trapping those particles in the room, increasing the risk of infection. We're visualizing this in virtual reality to train teams of nurses and doctors, as well as hospital administrators and the engineers who design and maintain the systems, to have a better understanding of the impact of their practices and the objects in the room in the quality of airflow. Our hope is that in the future, this knowledge will be included into protocols. That's a long road. For the past 2 years, I've been collaborating with neurosurgeons, and we have been focused on training. When a resident begins training, they already have the book knowledge of the surgery. But then they go into the surgical environment and they observe what is happening, and the expert instructor is constantly saying what they're doing. So it's sort of a think aloud situation where you see and hear everything that is going on. Stepwise, they start performing simple parts of the surgery, perhaps the initial incision, and they eventually graduate into the most difficult parts of the surgery. But here's the thing, they go from having never done it to doing part of the surgery on real patients. So we would like to put something in between, something where they can practice their eye-hand coordination and develop procedural skills. So our goal is to capture and visualize surgical know-how. We're using state-of-the-art motion capture environments to very carefully see what surgeons are doing with their hands, where they are looking, and what they are saying when they're performing a surgery in front of trainees. We want to use that information to simulate the surgery in virtual reality as well as augmented reality. We are constructing models of the patient. We already have imaging of patients that have donated those images to us, and we do 3D printing of the hard and soft tissue. So yes, we do have a model of the brain. Now here's the deal. Where is AI in the OR? Well, partly it's in the minds of the people. Partly it's in supporting the tasks. There are different phases that I would like to continue. Notice that I've started with training. I want to go to planning next. So no real patients yet. Just let's scan a real patient, get a good 3D model of whatever's happening to them, 3D print it, also have a see-through display, augmented reality or extended reality, and allow a surgical team to make informed decisions about what they should do. The role of AI in that situation is to provide suggestions and predictions. And now if we take that one step further and actually go into the operating room, which is a huge cost. Remember, we want to avoid hospital-acquired infections. Anything that you bring in must have value. So we want to create those suggestions, and we want to make those predictions, but one step at a time. I want to leave you with this question. Would you let an artificial surgeon operate on you without human assistance? Think about it carefully. I mean, I want you to, it's brain surgery. Think about that carefully. I've had this discussion with my colleagues, the neurosurgeons, and they are unanimous in no. It's never going to happen in my watch. We need to save the patient no matter what. The lights may go out, you may not be able to see what you're doing, but you need to palpate your way through the anatomy of the patient and save the patient. Machines are nowhere near the ability to adapt to that situation. A human must always be at the helm for practical and ethical reasons. You may capture my slides using that QR code, and you may connect with me using that name right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let me ask you, would you let an AI to operate on your brain?
The surgery that we're focusing on is an emergency procedure. If I have confidence that this is what's happening to me, and that's a big if, and there is no hospital, no human around, but I so happen to have my trusted companion robot that knows how to operate on me, and the option is dying, so there's a lot of ifs there, then yes, under all of those circumstances, if the option is certain death, well, might as well be a guinea pig.
And do you think there will be one day that it will be preferable to have an AI operate on you rather than a surgeon?
That's a really good question. We're already moving into a world where hospital systems may be liable if they don't use the latest technology. So if there's an AI that can perform a certain task better than humans on a regular basis, especially in the US where there's a strong litigation system around healthcare, doctors are seeing that they are increasingly obliged to use AI, which is a super interesting situation to be in.
Well, it will be interesting to see how the court cases develop on that front.
The case is, you had this technology, let's say X-rays, why didn't you use it? It was your responsibility to use the technology to save the patient. Again, move away from X-rays and now talk about deep neural networks or other machine learning algorithms that predict or suggest.
So we will just have to watch what happens in the coming years and decades probably on that front. But with that, thank you very much, Mario, for your talk.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
So, with that, we come to the conclusion of the first part of this TEDx talk. We will have a brief intermission where you can have fika, and we will start again in 20 minutes or so with the second part of our talk. Thank you. So, as we begin the second part of our TED Talk today, I should perhaps start with mentioning that the emergency exits are on that side and that side. Happily, we haven't had an emergency so far, so no issues on that front so far. Now for our next speaker, Gabriel Skantze. He's a professor in speech communication and technology with a specialization in conversational systems at the Department of Speech, Music and Hearing at KTH. He's also the chief scientist of Facets Robotics, developing social robots. Today he will be talking about a future towards face-to-face interaction with AI. Please welcome Gabriel Skantze.
In recent years, we have all seen fantastic improvements of AI, especially in generative AI, perhaps, like large language models. And I guess most of you have used services like ChatGPT, and I think we're all very sort of impressed by what these systems can do today compared to what we had just a few years ago. However, today I will argue that for many future use cases of AI, a written chat is not the optimal way of interacting with AI. So if you could sort of choose to interact with another person through a written chat or by sitting down and having a face-to-face conversation, I think most of you would choose the face-to-face conversation. The human face and voice are extremely expressive means of communication. And this is the way that we have been interacting with each other for perhaps 100,000 years or so. Written language, on the other hand, was an invention that came much later. You can think of it as a crude approximation of spoken language, as a highly lossive compression. Don't get me wrong, written language is great for certain things like writing books or letters. We can communicate over the centuries, but for real-time communication, written language is not the optimal form of communication. So then, what should an interface for face-to-face interaction look like? About 10 years ago, we developed this device, a robot, if you want, called Facets. Facets is the device that you can interact with in a face-to-face conversation, similar to how we interact with each other. Initially, it was a research project at KTH, but eventually we started a company called Facets Robotics. This animated, back-projected face has many advantages. One is that you can very flexibly change it so that you can make it look like a man or a woman or a child or an adult or different ethnicities, or even an alien if you want to. But you can also use it to make very nuanced facial expressions and a very sophisticated gaze behavior, using both the movement of the neck and the eye movements. Now, you might ask yourself, why should it look like a human? In fact, if you look at many other humanoid robots out there, they don't even have a face. And sometimes when they have a face, it's just a static mask, basically. And for me, the answer to that question is quite simple. We as humans have evolved to interact face-to-face, and we have been programmed by evolution to understand faces and voices in the way we look as humans. And I don't think it makes sense to learn now a new way of interacting with other agents. Just a few examples. The brain has developed certain regions that allow us to recognize thousands of different faces and interpret facial expressions. And in fact, the brain is so eager to recognize faces that we tend to see them everywhere. Here's another nice example of what evolution has done with us. So the whiteness of the sclera is actually quite unique to humans if you compare to other animals. And the most likely explanation for this is not that it has sort of improved our vision or anything, but it has a social function. It means that we as humans can read the gaze of others more easily. So we can see where they are looking. We can infer their attention. We can understand in a multi-party conversation who you are addressing, for example. Or if we're talking about objects, we can more easily infer which object you are talking about. So humans, very early on, just a few months old, develop a very strong interest in following the gaze of others. And we cannot see this behavior in other animals. So of course, just because you design a robot to look like a human, does that necessarily mean that humans will interpret it that way or treat it that way? No, of course not. So in a first series of experiments, we wanted to verify that. So we did experiments like this, where you see an early prototype of Furhat, where Furhat is describing the route on a map to a human. And what we could see is that humans naturally followed the gaze of Furhat, and when Furhat was looking at the landmarks on the map, they could more easily follow the instruction that the robot was giving, without us explicitly, of course, instructing them to do that. That sort of came natural. Here is a more realistic example, quite recent, where we have put Furhat in a self-driving bus as a host on the bus, given that there will not be any humans on these buses in the future. In this situation, of course, it's also important that we can see who Furhat is talking to, or maybe Furhat is looking at some specific detail on the bus. So that makes it sort of easier to have this kind of social interaction. Yet another example. Here we have Furhat giving an art presentation to an audience. In this case also, of course, Furhat can shift the gaze between the artwork and the audience to sort of steer the interaction. But what we are especially interested in here is the ability for the humans to give feedback, and for the robot then to adapt the presentation to the human feedback. Let's say people are not really following along. The robot might need to slow down or repeat itself. And how does the robot get that feedback? Again, through the face and the voice, right? So the humans might smile, they might frown, they might nod or shake their head. Or they might use their voice. They might use short vocal expressions like mm-hmm or yeah to show if they are following along or not. And actually these short vocal expressions are very nice examples of how expressive our voices are. On the map you see here, every blue dot is a short vocal expression from one and the same speaker from a series of conversations that person had. And what we have done here is to use AI to try to cluster all these different feedback sounds, depending on what they sound like and in the context that they appear. And this way, the AI can start to form an understanding of what the kind of feedback we as humans use. So let me play that for you. Here we have a cluster meaning something like, I'm listening.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Or what did you say?
Pardon? 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 What? What?
Or I'm impressed.
Wow. 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 Ooh. Wow.
Or that's interesting.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Or I agree with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Exactly. Right. Exactly.
So you can see how this sort of forms a map of this extreme variation and nuances of the way we interact with each other. Early on, I mentioned large language models and how they are used for text in services like ChatGPT. But we can use them for face-to-face interaction as well. So in this case, this is a collaboration with Karolinska Institute. And they wanted to develop a platform with virtual patients. So you know, You could use, for example, role-playing to train medical students. But what if you could use a robot instead and use them to train medical students? And that's exactly what we are doing. So actually now this is being used as part of the educational program at Karolinska for the students to be able to train what it's like to have conversation with a patient and make a diagnosis. For us, this is an excellent opportunity to see how close can we get to a face-to-face conversation to sort of be similar to a human-human interaction. So let's see what it looks like. I should also mention first that we're using the large language model not just to drive what the robot should say, but also the emotional state of the patient and the facial expressions that the patient should have.
Hello, I'm Mikkel. Nice to meet you. I've been dealing with this persistent pain in my body, and I was hoping you could help me figure out what's going on.
Okay, yeah, sure. How did it all start? Start from the beginning.
It all began about a month ago when I suddenly felt this burning pain in my shoulders and hips while I was standing in the kitchen peeling potatoes.
Okay. Have you had any other symptoms, or has it just been the burning sensation in your shoulders and hips?
Along with the pain, I've been feeling unusually tired, lost my appetite, and even had a headache that doesn't seem familiar.
Oh wow, that sounds really rough. Do you have any thoughts yourself as to why you've been feeling this way?
Well, I've been thinking that it might be related to my overall health. I have high blood lipids, and my mother and sister had rheumatic conditions, so I'm not sure if that's a factor.
You can, of course, imagine other scenarios we would like to have this kind of training. Let's say you're going to a job interview and you could train what it's like to take part in a job interview. And you can also then use the language model to give you feedback afterwards on the things that you did well and did not so well. So to conclude, I hope that I have convinced you that studying face-to-face conversation and trying to model face-to-face conversation like this is both fascinating and a meaningful thing. And I also want to stress that the idea here is not to replace humans with robots, but the idea is to replace flat screens and keyboards with something that is more similar to what it's like to interact with another human. This is an extremely hard challenge, of course, and despite all the progress that have been made in AI, there is a lot of things yet to do, and we are not there yet. But I think as part of this process, we are also learning something about ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. I was wondering, from your experience of being part of Facets, and we see many more research-oriented companies have been working in these, especially in the field of AI now, do you think that more collaboration is needed to be able to explore between companies and research communities and universities?
I mean, definitely, I think both have their value. So since I'm both involved in academia and industry myself, I think in academia you can do things thinking 5-10 years ahead. But in industry you can actually try, like the case with a virtual patient, what can you actually do with the technology you have today? And what impact can you have today? So both of these are extremely valuable, I think.
Yes, and hopefully we will have much more collaborations in the coming years, as I think it is very necessary, as the costs are driving up the amount of research. But thank you very much for that,
Thank you.
Gabriel. Yes, thank you. Our last speaker for today's event is Rebecca Stauer, currently holding a postdoc position at the Division of Robotics, Perception and Learning at KTH. Currently, her research focuses on the conceptualization of social intelligence in robots and the design of your robot. Nobody is perfect, not even your robot. Understanding and resolving failures in human-robot interaction. Please welcome Rebecca Stauer.
what an appropriate way to start a talk about failures in technology. So raise your hand if you have a robot vacuum cleaner or similar device at home. Now, keep your hand raised if your robot vacuum cleaner has ever done something that it wasn't supposed to do. Maybe it ran out of battery halfway through cleaning, bumped into something, or even fell down the stairs. If this has happened to you, then you're not alone. In fact, you've interacted with a robot that makes mistakes. And these kind of interactions are an example of the type of thing that we look at in human-robot interaction, where we can consider robots as a form of embodied artificial intelligence, as we just saw in Gabriel's talk. And there are many different types of robots that we interact with, or that we have the possibility to interact with in our daily or professional lives. For example, cobot arms, which might be used in industrial settings or on assembly lines. Humanoid social robots, which could be used, for example, in education or healthcare. Or even individual drones or drone swarms, which might be used, for example, in search and rescue scenarios or similar. However, as we just saw in the robot vacuum cleaner example, our interactions with robots can sometimes fail, and they can fail sometimes spectacularly. So what I focus on in my research is looking at exactly what happens when human-robot interactions go wrong. So let's start by talking a little bit more about what causes failures in human-robot interaction. On the one hand, you can consider maybe more hardware failures, which could be due to more the manipulation in the physical world. For example, a robot arm dropping a block. These kind of failures are often really task or goal-oriented. They have to do with the physical space. This is opposed to software failures, which are due more to the programming of the behavior of the robot. And this could be due, again, to multiple factors. Maybe the robot does what it was programmed to do, but in retrospect, it shouldn't actually behave this way. Or in the case of artificial intelligence, sometimes we don't even really know what's going on behind the scenes and what kind of biases might be being introduced. As an example, some of you might be familiar with, a couple of years ago, there was kind of this scandal because it came out that there were some AI-based translators that were using, that when they were translating, were taking gender-neutral languages like Turkish or Hungarian, where you would have sentence structures like they are an engineer, they are a doctor. And when they translated them into gender-based languages like English, it would translate them like he is a doctor, but she is a nurse. So obviously reinforcing kind of problematic gender stereotypes in our society. And this is problematic, of course, on an AI level, but when you take software like this and you implement it into a robot, this also introduces ethical problems as well. Suddenly you have a real interaction with a real robot happening in the real world, which is going to have, of course, implications. So these are the type of things that we need to consider when we want to design robots that are intended to interact with humans. So not only our own biases that we might be bringing to designing these behaviors, but also what biases could come with the technology that we're using. And has also been mentioned by some of the other speakers as well, there are general ethical considerations when we think about deploying robots in the wild, in public spaces. What data is being recorded from these interactions? Who has access to this data? Do people even really want to be interacting with a robot? Should we be designing robots that look and act like humans even though they are not? These are all really valid questions that we aim to investigate when we consider human-robot interaction. But going back to robot failures more specifically, we then need to consider not only why robot failures happen, but then the consequences on the interaction. How are these failures perceived by users? So imagine that you're in a shopping center, which is using a humanoid social robot, for example, to give directions to people. Now imagine that this robot approaches way too close to you. It invades your personal space. How are you going to perceive this error? If another human did this to you, you would maybe see this as a social norm violation. You would think, back off, and you would also think this person has no conception of personal space. But in this case, because it's a robot which is committing this error, maybe you're going to see it differently. You might think, oh, the computer vision system has failed, or there might be something else going on which is leading to this breakdown. So we can't necessarily assume that the same behaviors or that the same failures in a robot agent are going to be perceived the same way than if they were committed by a human. And furthermore, we can't even assume that the same mistakes committed by different robot agents are going to be perceived the same way. A humanoid social robot bumping into you is probably going to be seen quite differently than your robot vacuum cleaner bumping into you. So when we want to kind of then measure people's opinions of these robots when they fail, there are different kind of psychological variables that we can consider. For example, how much people like or dislike the robots they're interacting with, how much they trust the robots that they're interacting with, and how human-like or agentic these robots are seen to be. And these three factors are related, but they're not all the same, and they might be affected by failures differently. For example, trust oftentimes decreases following a failure, although not universally so. However, liking can sometimes actually increase after a failure occurs, which seems kind of surprising, but it could be in these cases that the failure is seen as unexpected or funny, like the microphone breakdown. We all laughed. This is a very low-stakes interaction. And also, we don't interact with robots so often, so we might be more tolerant for these failures. As our interactions with robots increase, maybe our tolerance is going to decrease and liking will decrease as well. Similarly, human likeness also increases when robots make mistakes sometimes. It could be maybe that making mistakes is only human. So there are many different of these kind of variables that we can look at and that we can consider when we want to look at the impact of failures on our interactions. As an example from my own work, recently we published a paper looking at failures in human-drone interaction, where we brought participants into the lab and had them navigate a drone through an obstacle course, like you can see in this video here. And we introduced a simulated failure during the interaction, which led to a direct monetary loss for the participants. And we found that somewhat, I guess, unsurprisingly, when they interacted with a drone that failed, they trusted it less, they enjoyed the interaction less, and they felt like they had less control over the drone compared to when they interacted with a drone that performed flawlessly. And while on the surface these findings might seem kind of intuitive, it's really important that we have a baseline understanding of what happens when we have interactions with robots that fail, because they will fail. And what I hope I've managed to highlight in the talk up until this point is that we can't necessarily assume that what we know from human-human interaction and from human social norms is going to apply to our interactions with robots. So we really need to be able to understand what's going on a fundamental level. As for what's next in the field of human-robot interaction and artificial intelligence, currently there's a lot of work going on in the space of cloud computing or edge computing, where you could potentially have multiple robots or other kinds of technologies embedded in a singular system, which is quite cool. So, for example, imagine that you go to a restaurant, you have a robot server that comes and takes your order. It sends this order to the kitchen where another robot is making your food. Maybe you've made the reservation at the restaurant using a voice technology or something similar, and maybe even while you're at the restaurant, your robot vacuum cleaner is at home cleaning. This is quite a futuristic scenario, or maybe not, depending on how far advanced you think our current tech is. But it's an example that shows how we can have multiple different technology embedded in a single system. At the same time, the more things you have going on, the more ways there are for things to go wrong. And so I'm curious about what will happen in these cases. If a single robot in this ecosystem breaks down, how do people deal with this? Do their expectations about a single robot in the system extend to others? What if you were to replace one robot in this system, take your robot server and replace it with another? Do people notice? Do they care? We are only just beginning to scratch the surface of these kinds of questions. And of course, at the end of the day, the field is called human-robot interaction, so we always have to consider the humans. Every single person that comes into this interaction is going to have different expectations, beliefs, and goals about how the interaction should go, and we should always try to take these into consideration as well when we are planning interactions between humans and robots. So yeah, basically things can go wrong, they will go wrong, but I hope that we can learn from this, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Considering what you spoke about, do you think that we need more interdisciplinary research into AI?
Yes, of course. So my own background is in psychology, and now I work in a computer science division. So there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that goes on here, especially in the AI space. We see a lot of terms coming out like human-centered artificial intelligence, trustworthy artificial intelligence, responsible AI, explainable AI. All of these things involve knowing like human psychology and understanding kind of what human users want out of the interactions. I mean, as some of the other speakers touched upon as well, we really want this technology to be serving us. But we also can use it kind of as a learning tool. Like when we understand our interactions with robots or with other technologies, we can learn more about our own psychology, our own social cognition, and kind of like go both ways. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Alright,
and
thank
we'll
you.
get to talk more about that in the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thanks.
And with that, I would like to thank all of our speakers for the thought-provoking talks. And I also would like to thank all of you for participating in this event and all of you who are watching. This has been TEDxKTH, and we are very pleased that so many people have been interested in our discussions today. Thank you.